You are standing in the middle of a desert. Not a scenic desert. Not a postcard desert. The kind of desert that kills people who are unprepared for it. With summer ground temperatures hot enough to blister skin through the sole of a shoe, and less than 5 inches of rain across an entire year. There is no river here. No lake. No natural reason for 2 million people to live in this exact spot, and no natural reason for 40 million more to visit it every single year. And yet, rising directly out of that dead ground, you can see it from 30 miles away at night. A wall of light so bright it is visible from space, burning through millions of dollars of electricity every single night, in a place that, by every geographic and environmental logic, should not support a small town, let alone one of the most famous cities on Earth. A mirage, a monument to bad decisions. A gaudy fantasy built on the empty promise that you might get lucky. That is the story most people carry around in their heads about this place. Neon and noise. Adults playing pretend with money they cannot afford to lose. A city with nothing real underneath it, propped up by desperation and free drinks. That is the story. Here is what is actually true. This city generates more money from gambling in a single year than most countries generate from their entire national exports. It employs hundreds of thousands of people in jobs that exist nowhere else on the planet in this concentration. It moved more concrete, more steel, and more water uphill against common sense than almost any urban project in American history, and it did all of it by convincing you to walk in the front door and hand over your money voluntarily, smiling the entire time. So the real question is not why does this city exist in a place that should not support human life? The real question is this: what does it say about all of us, that a business built entirely on losing money became one of the most successful business models human beings have ever invented? Because this is not just a story about a city in a desert. This is a story about what happens when you engineer an entire environment. Streets, lighting, sound, temperature, architecture, even the flow of air, around a single goal: keeping a human being inside a building for as long as possible while they hand over their money and feel happy about it. Las Vegas did not happen by accident. It was built, piece by people who understood human psychology decades before psychology had the language to explain what they were doing. And by the end of this video, you will probably never walk through a shopping mall, a casino, an airport, or even a grocery store the same way again. Let us rewind, because the story does not start with neon. It starts with dirt, railroads, and a legal loophole. In 1905, Las Vegas did not exist as a city. It existed as a patch of land at a railroad water stop, a place where trains crossing the desert between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City needed to refill before continuing on. A rail company auctioned off lots of land in a single day, and a small dusty settlement was born, because trains needed water and workers needed somewhere to sleep. That is the entire founding logic. Not gold, not oil, not fertile soil, a pit stop for machines. For the next 2.5 decades, Las Vegas was an unremarkable railroad town, the kind of place you would drive through without remembering its name. And then, in 1931, two things happened within months of each other that would define the next century of the city's existence. The state of Nevada legalized gambling, and construction began less than 30 miles away on what would become one of the largest engineering projects in American history, the Hoover Dam. Thousands of workers poured into the region to build the dam, and those workers needed somewhere to spend their wages when the workday ended. Nevada, meanwhile, was broke. The Great Depression had gutted the state's economy, and legislators were desperate for any legal source of tax revenue. So they made a calculated bet of their own. If people were going to gamble anyway, illegally, in back rooms and hidden card games, why not legalize it, tax it, and let the state collect a share of every dollar lost? It was not a moral endorsement of gambling. It was a financial survival strategy dressed up as policy. That single decision, made by a handful of lawmakers trying to keep a bankrupt state afloat, is the entire reason this city exists, in the form you recognize today. Legal gambling gave Las Vegas something almost no other American city had: a completely open, government-sanctioned playground for an industry that was illegal almost everywhere else in the country. And when an activity is legal in exactly one place while remaining illegal nearly everywhere around it, that place becomes a magnet. People will travel. People will drive for hours, fly across the country, cross state lines, specifically to do the thing they cannot legally do at home. Las Vegas became, by design and by accident at the same time, the only legal outlet for a desire that never actually went away anywhere else. It did not invent the human urge to gamble. It simply became the one place where that urge was allowed to walk through the front door in the light of day. Now here comes the part of the story most documentaries gloss over, because it is uncomfortable, and it involves men who would eventually be shot in bathtubs and parking lots. Early Las Vegas casinos were modest operations, small buildings, small stakes, small ambitions. That changed permanently in 1946, when a mobster named Bugsy Siegel, known to almost everyone as Bugsy, a nickname he reportedly despised, opened a resort called the Flamingo on a stretch of desert highway outside the city limits. Siegel was not a hotel developer. He was an enforcer for organized crime syndicates on the East Coast, and the money that built the Flamingo came largely from mob financiers who expected a fast, enormous return. Siegel had a different, more expensive idea. He wanted to build something that did not look like a gambling hall. He wanted glamour. Palm trees shipped in from other states. Imported marble. A resort that felt more like a tropical escape than a card room. Designed specifically to make wealthy visitors feel like they had stepped into a fantasy rather than a transaction. The project ran wildly over budget, opened late, and lost money in its first months. And Siegel's mob backers, who had fronted enormous sums expecting quick profits, were furious. In 1947, Siegel was shot to death in Beverly Hills, and to this day, no one has ever been formally charged with the murder. But here is the twist historians keep coming back to. Within months of Siegel's death, the Flamingo turned a significant profit, and the formula he had gambled his life on, glamour first, gambling second, luxury as the hook, chips as the trap, became the blueprint every casino built after it would follow. Siegel did not live to see it, but he essentially invented modern Las Vegas, and organized crime money quietly financed a huge share of the resorts that followed through the 1950s and 60s, laundering profits through casino floors that were, on paper, simply very successful hotels. By the 1960s, Las Vegas had a problem. It had built its reputation on mob money, and mob money attracts federal attention. The city needed to launder its own image, not just its cash, and it needed legitimate corporate capital if it ever wanted to grow past a certain size. That transformation arrived largely through one enormously wealthy, enormously strange man, Howard Hughes. In 1966, Hughes moved into the top floor of the Desert Inn Hotel and, according to widely reported accounts, refused to leave, eventually simply buying the entire hotel rather than checking out. Over the following years, he purchased casino after casino across the city, pouring corporate money into an industry that had previously run largely on organized crime financing. His presence, strange as it was, gave Wall Street and mainstream banks the confidence to start treating Las Vegas as a legitimate investment target rather than a mob laundromat. Publicly traded corporations began buying up properties throughout the 1970s and 80s, and the city that had been built by hitmen and gangsters slowly became a stock market asset, listed, audited, and regulated. This is where the story shifts from crime history to something far more interesting, the science of the casino floor itself. Because once corporations took over, they did not just want a fun resort anymore. They wanted predictable, repeatable, scientifically optimized profit, and they hired architects, designers, and eventually behavioral psychologists to help them build spaces engineered to keep a human body inside a building for as long as physically possible. Consider the layout of a casino floor, something most visitors never consciously notice, but that was mapped out with extraordinary precision. There are famously very few clocks visible on a casino floor. Windows are frequently minimized or absent entirely in the gaming areas, so natural light cannot signal to your brain that hours have passed. The path from a hotel's front entrance to the elevators that lead to your room is deliberately routed through the gaming floor itself, forcing every guest to physically walk past rows of slot machines and tables multiple times a day, whether they intended to gamble or not. Carpets in many casinos were historically designed with busy, disorienting patterns, partly to discourage people from looking down and noticing how tired their feet were getting. Oxygen levels and air temperature on some casino floors have reportedly been carefully calibrated to keep guests alert and comfortable rather than sleepy, and the background sound of coins, bells, and digital chimes from slot machines is specifically engineered using audio psychology to signal winning, even when a player is actually losing money overall on that spin. A machine can register what the industry calls a loss disguised as a win, where a player bets a certain amount, wins back a smaller amount, and the machine still erupts in celebratory sound and light as though they had won big. None of this is accidental, and none of it is subtle once you know what you are looking for. It is the deliberate application of behavioral science to architecture, and it works because human brains did not evolve to resist it. Slot machines, in particular, are built around a psychological principle called variable ratio reinforcement, the same reward structure that makes checking a phone notification so compulsively addictive. When a reward arrives unpredictably, sometimes after one try, sometimes after 50, the brain's dopamine system responds far more powerfully than it does to a reward that arrives on a predictable schedule. BF. Skinner demonstrated this with pigeons in the 1950s, and modern slot machine designers, whether they cite him directly or not, are running the exact same experiment on human beings, at scale, 24 hours a day, in a building specifically constructed to maximize the number of pulls a person makes before they leave. There is another layer to this system that most visitors never see, because it is designed specifically to be invisible to everyone except the people it targets. Casinos track player behavior obsessively, using loyalty cards that log every dollar wagered, every hour spent at a machine, and every game a guest prefers, feeding that data into systems that identify a small group of extremely high-value gamblers known inside the industry as whales. These are players capable of losing, and sometimes winning, hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in a single visit, and casinos will do almost anything to keep them coming back. Free penthouse suites, private jets sent to collect them, personal hosts assigned to manage their every request, from restaurant reservations to concert tickets to simply having someone to talk to at 3 in the morning. This entire apparatus, worth enormous sums in complimentary rooms, meals, and entertainment, exists because the industry has calculated, with cold precision, exactly how much a whale is statistically likely to lose over a lifetime of visits, and it is almost always profitable to give away spectacular luxury for free in order to keep that person walking back through the door. The free drinks handed to an ordinary tourist wandering the floor are the exact same logic operating at a smaller scale. A tiny, calculated cost designed to keep a person seated at a machine for another 20 minutes rather than walking away sober and clear-headed. It would be dishonest to tell this story without acknowledging the cost sitting underneath all of it. Gambling addiction is a recognized, diagnosable behavioral disorder, and researchers estimate that a meaningful percentage of regular casino gamblers meet the clinical threshold for problem gambling at some point, with consequences that include devastating debt, broken families, and in the most severe cases, suicide. Nevada has, over the decades, funded helplines, support programs, and self-exclusion lists that allow people to voluntarily ban themselves from casino floors across the state. The industry will tell you, correctly, that the vast majority of gamblers lose modest amounts and walk away simply having paid for entertainment, the same way someone pays for a movie ticket or a concert. But the machine does not know the difference between the tourist who can comfortably afford to lose $200 on a Saturday night and the person sitting 3 seats down who cannot. It is built to extract value from both of them with exactly the same efficiency, and that is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath every flashing light on that floor. And the numbers this generates are almost impossible to process at a human scale. Slot machines and other electronic gaming devices generate the overwhelming majority of casino gambling revenue in Nevada, far more than table games like blackjack or poker, precisely because they require no social skill, no interaction, and almost no interruption between the desire to play and the ability to play again. The city of Las Vegas, together with the wider region around it, produces billions of dollars in gaming revenue annually, and that figure does not even include the hotel rooms, restaurants, shows, and shopping that surround it. Nevada, notably, has no state income tax, and one of the central reasons the state can afford that is the enormous tax revenue it collects from gambling itself. In a very real sense, Everyone who visits and loses money at a casino is subsidizing the tax bill of every full-time Nevada resident who never sets foot on a gaming floor. Here is the part of this story that almost nobody expects, and it is not about crime or psychology. It is about water. This entire city, this glittering, fountain-filled, pool-draped fantasy of excess, sitting in one of the driest environments in North America, survives on an almost impossibly thin water margin, and for decades it managed that margin better than nearly anyone gives it credit for. The overwhelming majority of the region's water supply comes from a single source, the Colorado River, delivered through Lake Mead, and that lake has been shrinking for years under the combined pressure of drought and enormous regional demand. You would expect a city built around massive fountains, artificial lakes inside casino resorts, and lush green golf courses to be one of the most wasteful water consumers in the country. Instead, the region built one of the most aggressive water recycling systems in the United States. Nearly all of the water used indoors in Las Vegas, in hotel showers, sinks, laundry, and kitchens, is treated and returned to Lake Mead, and the local water authority receives credit for that returned water, allowing it to draw an equivalent amount back out for reuse. The famous fountains you see on the Strip largely run on this same recycled, treated water, rather than fresh water pulled directly from the lake. The city also pays residents to remove decorative grass lawns entirely, replacing them with desert landscaping, and has, at times, made ornamental grass functionally illegal for new development in an effort to cut outdoor water waste, which accounts for a dramatically larger share of consumption than anything happening inside a casino. A city famous for wretched excess quietly became one of the most water-efficient large cities in America, not because anyone wanted to save the planet, but because a shrinking desert reservoir does not care how many neon signs you can afford, and the entire economy would collapse the moment the water ran out. That is the twist underneath the twist. The most theatrical, most exaggerated, most seemingly wasteful city in the country was forced by pure physical necessity to become disciplined and efficient in almost every place tourists never think to look. The fantasy is loud, and the survival mechanism behind it is quiet, and the entire operation depends on keeping those two things completely separate in the mind of every visitor walking through the front door. But there is one more twist buried inside this story, and it might be the strangest one of all. The city that gambling built no longer runs primarily on gambling. For most of the last decade, a majority of the revenue generated on the Strip has come not from the tables and the machines, but from hotel rooms, restaurants, nightclubs, concert residencies, sporting events, and retail shopping. The percentage of total resort revenue coming directly from gaming has been shrinking for years, even as overall visitor spending keeps climbing. Major residencies from global recording artists, championship boxing and mixed martial arts events, an enormous professional sports push that brought a National Hockey League franchise and a National Football League franchise to a city that had never had major league sports of its own, and eventually a Formula One street race that shut down the entire Strip for a weekend. All of it points toward the same underlying shift. Gambling built the skeleton of this city, and gambling is still the reason it exists in this exact location. But the muscle keeping it alive today is spectacle itself, sold in almost any form a visitor is willing to pay for. In a strange way, the industry built entirely around the odds being against you has spent the last 20 years diversifying away from its own founding product, because it turns out people will pay just as eagerly to watch something extraordinary happen as they will to gamble on making something extraordinary happen to themselves. And this is where the bigger question comes back around, because Las Vegas is not really unusual for being a city built on an industry that profits from human weakness. It is unusual for being honest about it, at least architecturally. Every casino on that Strip is, in essence, a machine, built to extract money from people who statistically know the odds are against them and choose to play anyway. That is not an accident of human psychology. It is the entire design brief. And most of us walk through that building, lose a few $100s over a weekend, and call it entertainment, a fair trade for a good time, because the loss is honest, upfront, and wrapped in enough spectacle that it does not feel like what it actually is. Now think about the rest of your life for a moment. Think about the apps on your phone engineered with the exact same variable reward system that makes a slot machine addictive, refreshing a feed hoping the next scroll delivers something exciting. Think about supermarkets that route you past the most tempting, highest margin items on your way to the everyday staples you actually came in for. The same way a casino routes you past a wall of slot machines on your way to the elevator. Think about subscription services designed to make canceling deliberately difficult, and free trials engineered to auto-convert into charges you forget you agreed to. Las Vegas simply did all of this first, and did it out loud, with neon signs advertising exactly what it was doing to you, while charging you for the pleasure of walking through the door. Maybe that is the real reason this city fascinates people the way it does. It is not because it is strange. It is because it is honest about something almost every other industry in your life is quietly doing to you as well, just without the flashing lights, the free drinks, and the fountains set to music, making the whole thing feel like a party instead of exactly what it is. So the next time you walk into a store and find yourself somehow 20 minutes deep into aisles you never meant to visit, or catch yourself refreshing an app for the 5th time in 10 minutes chasing a feeling you cannot quite name, remember the city built entirely out of a desert, on a bet that human beings would keep walking through the door long after the odds made it clear they should walk away. It was never really about the cards, or the dice, or the machines. It was always about understanding exactly what keeps a person in the room. Las Vegas simply built an entire skyline around that one idea, and it has been cashing in on it ever since. If you have ever walked out of somewhere having spent more than you meant to, without quite knowing how it happened, let us know in the comments. There is a good chance the room was built for exactly that.